Hello, and welcome to the Behavior Education Connection, the podcast that works to connect the world of behavior analysis and the world of education. We focus on topics important to behavior analysts who work in the public schools and those who support them. Join us and spend time gaining insights and ideas as our host talks with fellow behavior analysts as well as other experts in the field. Welcome again to our newest episode of the Behavior Education Connection. I'm your host, Selena Layden, and I am really excited to have a good friend back for a new episode. Haley Mullins, how are you?
Good afternoon, Selena. Great to be here. Thanks for asking me to join you.
I'm really happy you're here. If you can, just tell us, because I actually think you are not in the same place you were when you were with us last time. So can you tell us what you're doing these days?
Absolutely. So I am privileged to serve as the Director of Special Education and Related Services with Winchester Public Schools. Previously, I had served as the Coordinator of Special Education as well as the Autism Behavior Specialist in BCBA with Campbell County Schools. So since we last talked, I've not only moved divisions and positions, but also moved regions. So I'm really excited to be working in Region 4 with some new school divisions.
Well, again, Haley, I'm really glad you're here. And Haley is one of my favorite guests. So I'm super happy to have this conversation. Today, we are talking about using microdata to guide macro leadership decisions, which sounds really, really fancy and potentially intimidating. So let's start with what are we actually talking about today, Haley?
So one of the things that I've been most challenged with is how do we as behavior analysts use our unique skill set in really new, fun, and inventive ways while still operating within our ethical practice. And as part of a public school, I think that we always are inundated with this concept of data-driven decision making. Particularly in the state of Virginia right now, we are undergoing a new accreditation system. So there's a lot of buzz about the use of data to support student achievement, outcomes, staff evaluations, et cetera. But a lot of times in the education realm, there's a lack of clarity about what data actually looks like. And there's so much data to be used to tell our story that I feel as though as behavior analysts, we have a unique opportunity to talk about very specific and objective forms of data that are unique to our skill set. Particularly direct measures data collection, trend analysis, as well as our use of visual and graphic display of our data to really tell our data story. Those are some of the nuances that are so fluent to us at that really small micro level, that individual student level, that I think can be just so powerful for bigger decision making, both at the school and the division level.
So what are some examples of micro level data that you think about?
So when I think about micro level data, I think about that one student in that one class that as a behavior analyst, you get a call and say, I need help. And so as a behavior analyst, you go into the classroom, you conduct observations, collect direct measures data, conduct the FBA process, develop that BIP. And within that process, you have so many different forms of very granular data. For example, you may know how long a student on average is able to tolerate engaging in an instructional period. You may know the frequency count of the number of requests the student appropriately makes to get their wants and needs met. So we're really well versed in some of that granular micro data that sometimes I think we don't always give ourselves credit for how we could apply that in broader ways.
So one of the things that we talk about with school-based behavior analysts a lot is, yes, they absolutely work with individual children that have behavioral needs, right? But a lot of our behavior analysts, there's just not enough of us. And so they can't touch every student that may need or benefit from their services and supports. So how do we think about that data in a bigger way, or the broader sense that you alluded to make better decisions that would affect more students?
Absolutely. So first, all good behavior analysts always collect the data and then sort of synthesize the trends. So that's something that's part of our practice on that micro level. What do you do when you first get that maybe initial student referral? I view the use of the micro data to inform macro decision making in that same way. So thinking in your context, what those data points may be. In my previous context as a school behavior analyst, I had robust data for division level FBA data. So I knew every student in the division that had an FBA. So that was one piece of data. I also had access to all of the BIPs in my division. And so that was yet another piece or several pieces actually of data. Within those, I was able to extract trends in function. So out of the several hundred BIPs that are in existence, is there a trend in the function of the behavior, in the intervention that's being applied? So while we tend to focus on that one FBA, that one BIP, looking at it from that broader macro level can actually help us be more effective. Nothing's worse than feeling like a firefighter. And I know that we always feel like we are always called to help out with just this one case. But if we take time to really analyze the data that's available to us in our context, and whether that's the classroom level or even the division level, we might be able to find better ways to be effective. Some of those elements may generate into clarity of process and procedure just to be more efficient. Others may generate recommendations for staff training, maybe to improve effectiveness and efficiency of intervention plan development, or even some antecedent-based interventions to avoid the need for some of these intensive plans to begin with. I found myself using the same process even in my current role, where I'm constantly extracting data from classrooms, from schools, and then comparing them to schools to identify staffing needs, to identify professional development needs, and then also articulate the work of my department to our board and superintendent.
I think that you highlighted a lot of really great uses for data that I don't know that people always think about, right? Like we're inundated with, oh, I have all these kids that need an FBA, or I have all these behavior plans that I'm responsible for kind of overseeing or ensuring training's happening. But if we, and I love your comparison with the firefighter, right? If we can take a step back and say, of all the behavior intervention plans we have, 90% of them are happening at the elementary level. And it sure seems like a lot of them have to do with attention-seeking behaviors. Okay, so then what can we do about that? Not necessarily at the individual teacher level, but to your point, with staff training, with procedures and policies. Are there inadvertently procedures we have in place that are contributing to some of these problems and some of these issues that we're having? Because doing an FBA and a BIP, while they are very valuable, they are also very time consuming. And if we can prevent problem behavior before we have to get to that point for a bigger number of our students, that's only going to save us time, but it's also going to allow us to devote more time to instruction, which of course is the goal, right?
Absolutely. And I think that you bring up a great point. I almost equate this process almost as if it's an antecedent-based intervention for our overall individual responses, right? So thinking about ways that we are constructing an environment in which some of these things may not be as relevant or required because we're already initiating them. I think a lot about these staffing considerations right now. We know that special education teachers are disproportionately represented in our provisionally licensed groups. They're more susceptible to attrition and turnover. And honestly, we have a lot of vacancies across Virginia. The same thing is true in general education. And I'd like to think that our support of microdata to support those macro level problems could actually serve as that antecedent-based intervention to things such as staff burnout and attrition, supporting the building of capacity, and then at the same time, making sure that we're reducing the likelihood of staff really needing our intensive quote unquote firefighting supports.
Yeah, the other thing, and if you've been listening to me for a while, you know that I always encourage our folks to think of themselves as leaders in their position, right? Like whatever our role is, where we are a leader within the school. And so I think this is a really great way to take a small step, something we're already really comfortable with, right? Data collection and data analysis is it's our wheelhouse. And using that in a way that can help support better systems, support effective systems change, help people at kind of this bigger, as we call it, macro level, and again, kind of push into that leadership position, even though we may not officially have a position of authority.
Oh, absolutely. And I look at this, how would this translate at the classroom level? So taking all of your students that you're currently serving, most of you, if you're serving in some sort of special education or behavior analyst capacity, most likely are working with students with some unique needs beyond that of the general curriculum. And so thinking about your, whether it's a caseload or your instructional load, what are those trends in your data, which could be academic, it could be behavioral, it could be regarding functional communication, any number of things to then aid in the building of capacity for your paraprofessionals, better aligning your instruction to maximize your efficiency. If all of your students or a proportion of your students are all working towards a comparable goal, what might that mean about how you schedule your instructional delivery? So even beyond that of the FBA and BIP, I think that there are elements that many of us have access to, including IEPs. And other student records that help us really glean that direct measures data. I think about common additional data points that I've used just in trend analysis for IEPs. So thinking about trends in goals. What are your trends in accommodations? And how does that either speak to change that needs to occur to address maybe a root cause of a problem, or whether that can actually just be used as leverage for either capacity building or efficiency.
Well, and I love the thought of applying our science in a different way, right? So almost doing a functional behavioral assessment
Mhm.
on your data. And so you brought up IEP goals, and I think it's a really great example. If everyone has a reading comprehension goal, is that because everyone needs a reading comprehension goal and we need to increase our reading supports and services? Or is it because our teachers aren't really sure how to create effective goals that are meaningful for individual
Right.
students? And so we need to provide professional development on how do we decide what an appropriate goal is. Our data tells us what the problem is, and then we need to get into the why of that.
Absolutely. And I think too, extending some of those elements to true differentiation and sort of continuing that line of staff capacity. I think about how we can utilize certain elements of data in our world to then aid in both the primary, secondary, and tertiary responses that we deliver. So going back to some common examples of maybe analyzing the trends in interventions that are found most predominantly in the intervention plans that you're supporting. If we find that 80% of intervention plans all include a specific intervention, perhaps the use of a break, visual supports, a token system, that can be used to support primary staff development. So we're going to train all maybe a certain grade level or an entire population of teachers, and whether in that context that's a grade level context or a content group or a school-based group or even a division or a cluster of schools. But then thinking about how we can extend that into differentiation of secondary and tertiary needs. So it may be that based on our intervention plans, we have data to support really macro level leadership of development, professional development for certain interventions. But then we start breaking down the data and realize, wow, maybe all student or all teachers at this one school or this one cluster would benefit from professional development in these areas because that's what our data suggests. But then beyond that, breaking that data down to say, within that data, here are some subgroup trends and threads that are really emerging that would then lead me to develop either maybe deeper or extended supports as well. So maybe the special education teachers may need something a little bit more intensive or in depth beyond that of what's being provided to the general education. So I almost think in that tiered system of support realm too, how do we take this macro data, micro data, create that macro plan, and then bring it back down into subgroups for support? And whether that's student support or teacher support, I think both are applicable.
Well, and I really liked what you said about what is your kind of sphere of influence, right? And
Yeah.
that's not the term you use, but this idea of if I'm in the classroom, then I have access to all of my students that are in my classroom. And so then I can look for trends in that. If I'm a behavior analyst who oversees a student support team or a behavior support team, what kind of trends are we seeing? Like, every teacher's coming to us the third week of school because kids can't follow routines. Oh, wow, that's really important information that we can use. And then this idea of funneling up to, I bet that's not just our behavior support team that's seeing this. I bet we're seeing it across our entire school district or part of our school district. And then funneling back down to then, okay, so how do we support teachers better so that we don't have the third week of school, everybody coming and saying, I don't know what to do with my kids because they don't know how to put their work in their folders or they don't know how to line up or, the common problems that we kind of see that can lead to some of these referrals early on that really probably don't necessitate high level intervention, but are certainly obviously the teacher needs help and they need support. And so how can we provide that in a way that's meaningful?
Absolutely. And I refer to it a lot as telling our data story. We, as behavior analysts, we have such a unique understanding of high quality data, what that actually looks like. It's, not qualitative, it is objective. We know how to generalize and apply multiple measures to tell that story. And it's just a matter of also honing in on the story that you want to tell based on the need. And I think, well, that has a lot of promise. It does also come with some challenges in the public schools. I think about some of the experiences that I've had where maybe I knew the data story that I wanted to tell, and I knew the data that I needed, or perhaps the missing pieces that I needed, but I didn't necessarily know how to get those missing pieces. So thinking about our need to collaborate amongst teams, across teams, even interdepartmentally, is so important for us to be able to tell that data story. I think about one experience that I've had with a team member when we were reviewing her data and trying to tell her data story based on the staff and students that she was supporting. We recognized that she had several missing pieces, and I, as the leader of the team, even had some misconceptions about the data that she had access to. And so, as we started unpacking, like what was missing out of that data story to really give her macro level recommendations, we started unpacking and realizing that she didn't have access to our PBIS system. And her MTSS access in our database actually was not at the fullest capacity across our schools. By talking interdepartmentally, we are able to close that feedback loop, which made her life so much more efficient, but then also allowed us to demonstrate that collaboration beyond just our scope. I also think of other access points such as student information systems. I worked with a team member that was trying to tell her data story and had some missing pieces. And although she had access to some of the student information system elements, she didn't have proficiency in using that data system because it wasn't something that was primarily utilized in her role. And so in that instance, we had to shift our collaboration not from access and seeking interdepartmental collaboration for accessing the data, but it really was to build our capacity in our own access of what we had available. And I think that as behavior analysts, when we're serving in so many different capacities, we most likely find ourselves having access to a ton of different systems. We may be privy to the IEP system and the PBIS system and the student information system, but we're also rarely experts on any one of those because we have access to all of them. And I think that we do have to recognize our need to collaborate so that we can be proficient data analysts of what is available to us, because there's a ton of rich data information that we can glean from.
Yeah, I think a lot of really rich information and a lot of really great opportunities. Haley, I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and you have such a unique way of kind of thinking through some of these big system pieces. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Any last minute thoughts that you want to share with us?
Just always remember to know the data story that you want to tell, and don't be afraid to seek out that data to tell your story.
And I love that thought. I think it's a great closing thought of what is your data story. So, with that, Haley, thank you so much for your time and being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Selena.
All right. And to our listeners, we will see you during our next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Behavior Education Connection. Join us next time for another great conversation about behavior analysis in the schools. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. Sending out a special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for supporting our work. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon.